Hi, I'm Rob Vanstone. Welcome to the latest edition of the rider-rumblings video podcast. I am with my worthy constituent, Dr. Murray McCormick, and we are discussing a bit of a new twist to the Rough Rider season, Sunday's 23-8 loss to the Winnipeg Blue Bombers. And, in some ways, there's some good things to talk about in that the special teams played pretty well. Brett Lowther missed a field goal, which was an event, but also made a 54-yarder. John Ryan continued to send punts into orbit. There's some evidence of a return game thanks to Jamal Morrow. Defense played the type of game that will ordinarily win you a game in the Canadian Football League. And the offense played the type of game that probably wouldn't win you a game in the Prairie Football Conference. Murray, what do you make of this?
I think that's what I kind of found was I thought the reaction from fans was a little over the top, considering they did all those gains in other areas. Jamal Morrow brought some semblance of a return game. The defense did play well. How about, can we do this on a rider-centered podcast that maybe give the Blue Bombers a little credit? That defensive line, Willie Jefferson and Jeffcoat were just, Willie Jefferson's just such a great player that he can win a game for one defense. And I think he really did a lot of that too. So how about, can we give credit to Winnipeg, or do we have to always sort of blame the Rough Riders? But I think the Winnipeg defense in the second half was just dominant. What could Cody Fajardo do? He didn't have any time. Do you blame it on the offensive line? Yeah, a little bit, but still, I think we got to give a lot of credit to Winnipeg's defense.
I think you got to throw Adam Bighill in there too, in the type of game he had, and Brandon Alexander with 2 picks. Richie Hall's scheme really didn't give the Rough Riders much to work with offensively. So yes, absolutely. I mean, the Winnipeg defense totally influenced what was happening with the Rider offense. You look at that offense, and it's not like there were a bunch of evident gaffes. There was the drop pass by Ricardo Lewis. His presence in the lineup still baffles me. Yes. And there was the overthrow when Cody Fajardo had Kyran Moore for what should have been an 80-yard touchdown. Instead, he was overthrown. Aside from that, I don't look at it and say they really made a mess of this. Yeah, the first Brandon Alexander interception, obviously Cody Fajardo needs to make a better read there. The third interception, you're just trying to make something happen against a defense that's hanging back. I'm not even going to make a big deal out of that one. And the other interception was a ball that came fluttering out of Cody Fajardo's hands because of the ubiquitous presence of Willie Jefferson. So. Yeah. But it's not like I think there were fewer evident gaffes by the offense than there were by the officials in the command center. They just, the Winnipeg defense, as it has been prone to do this year, made life miserable for a rival offense. This time it happened to be the Rough Riders that they were playing. And once again, a Winnipeg opponent was held to fewer than 10 points. That's what Winnipeg had been doing coming in, and they kept doing it.
That's when I talk about the credit to Winnipeg's defense. It's the best defense in the league. I think the Riders is pretty darn good, but I don't think it stands up to what Winnipeg is doing right now. And I think Cody, we kind of forget. How many games has he played? 19? 20 games?
So it's 17 starts in 16 starts plus one in the playoffs in 2019, and then so 21 starts.
21 starts. I guess 21 starts for a guy who'd never been a starter before. And he's not entitled, but maybe expected to have an off game or two that maybe reminds us that he's still a relatively young starting quarterback. And we got spoiled last year. We got spoiled where almost everything he did seemed to go right, except for that one play off the crossbar.
And I'm not going to put it on Cody Fajardo. What did he have to work with? Honestly, Shaq Evans isn't there. Jordan Williams-Lambert is a lot of good things as a receiver, but he isn't a wide receiver. They don't have a lot of speed on offense, even with Kyran Moore in there. Aside, is there anybody whose speed has to really terrify a rival defensive coordinator? No, they don't. I think they actually had a running game on Sunday after a couple of shaky running plays to begin, but they opted not to use it, even though the game was close and the score certainly didn't take the Rough Riders out of the running game until the Nick Dembski touchdown. So they finally get a running game where William Powell is doing something, and they completely abandon it. So honestly, I don't know what people expect of Cody Fajardo. You're playing this carnivorous defense, and their defensive ends are playing against a pair of offensive tackles who are both in their first season as a starter in the league. And I don't even necessarily think that Andrew Lauderdale and Cameron Jefferson played that badly. They just had to deal with Willie Jefferson and Jackson Jeffcoat, and that is not fun. And it's not like Cody Fajardo was sacked a bunch of times, but he would have to run. He was, especially with Willie Jefferson exerting the kind of pressure he was exerting. There were a lot of times when Cody Fajardo had to just escape trouble and get what he could. But when you call a running play and nobody bothers to block Willie Jefferson and he stuffs it for a loss of 1, what are you going to do? How do you not pay attention to Willie Jefferson on that play, right? It's just Albert Awachi did not block Willie Jefferson, so he stops William Powell for a loss of 1. Things like that, just basic busts. What are you going to do? And that's the nature of playing those Winnipeg defensive ends. But the Riders didn't do themselves any favors by not making sure that they had the kind of personnel on the field or deploying that personnel in a manner that could actually test the Bombers' defense to a greater extent than was the case on Sunday. Because who is there on that offense that's really going to test that Bomber defense?
Well, they like to think
the personnel isn't very good on offense, is it?
That's a good point. And Kyran Moore is the only speedster on that offense, I think. And how fast is he? He's fast, but I don't think he's in the league of a lot of the other big-time speedy receivers. And you talk about that, even that pass where he's overthrown, you wonder why he could, maybe he's a little quicker, he gets there.
No, that was an overthrow. Kyran Moore I watched that play 3 times last night. There was, I'm not sure Jerry Rice gets to that ball. Maybe Joey Walters does.
Well, can we just say one thing?
No Steeler does.
No, well, the Steeler.
Juju Smith-Schuster does not get to that ball.
No, there's not a lot of speed on this.
John Stallworth does.
Okay, back to. I kind of like the way went, and I know it's different, but Cody stopped and accepted the blame for it, as we expected. He's never accepted the credit, but he said it was on him. He says, which is good to say that that's what Cody's like. He's not going to pass it off and say that the receivers aren't fast enough. I didn't like the offensive scheme, but I just think that way they got Winnipeg's defense plays. It's just I don't know how you can beat that defense. I guess with the short passes and the intermediate passes didn't work. They don't really like to go deep as much as they used to in last year. So how do you beat that defense?
Well, it's not that really that they had a disinclination to go deep on Sunday. It's that it didn't work. They tried 8 passes that traveled at least 20 yards in the air, and they completed 1 of them. Whereas Zach Collaros was 3 for 5 in those situations, and one of those incompletions was a pass that Nick Dembski probably should have caught. And if you look at the Bombers, they're way more effective overall on deeper routes than the Rough Riders are. Look at that beautiful pass that Zach Collaros threw to Nick Dembski in the end zone. Mike Adam had good coverage there. He just put basically Zach Collaros put it in the bucket. But Rough Riders they were coming into the game. They were 3 for 12 for the year on passes that exceeded 20 yards beyond the line of scrimmage, and now they're 4 for 20, and wow. And that's not the type of offense that Cody Fajardo led coming out of the gate in 2019, when that was one of the things that helped establish him as the Rough Riders starting quarterback, is his proficiency over the top, and that's what they have not been able to do. And at some point, opposing defensive coordinators are going to see that and say, well, almost dare them to beat them over the top, like with the nature of the Rough Rider passing game and all these short passes and the lack of a running game or the lack of an inclination to use the running game. Just crowd those receivers and don't let them have those quick little plays. And once I think the tone was set for the game, the Riders' first offensive play, they threw that little quick pass to Braden Lennius and got 3 yards. There was no yards. There weren't any yards after catch. And suddenly, if you're relying on the short passing game to get you the kind of yardage you want on first down and you're not getting it, then you're playing right into the Bombers' hands. And that's what they did.
Who would have believed we'd be talking about the Jason Maas offense that way after we put up with the Stephen McAdoo offense last year and the questions about how things are being done. And here is a Jason Maas offense, which is supposed to be aggressive, over the top and all that stuff. And that one game, it showed they can be beaten, it can be pushed. So that's kind of it. I never thought we'd be saying that about it.
I think it's fair to call into question Jason Maas and his strategy. Now, you also have to call into question what Jason Maas has to work with, just as you have to look at what Cody Fajardo has to work with, in that does he have the kind of weapons that an offensive coordinator can use advantageously. But
How about the word
When Stephen
pedestrian?
McAdoo walks the plank after losing 20-13 in the West Division final, and after helping develop a first-year starting quarterback into a CFL All-Star and the West Division's most outstanding player, and suddenly that's deemed to be insufficient, and then you bring in Jason Moss. Okay, if Stephen McAdoo is not going to be brought back after they score 13 points and don't score a touchdown, how do you not question the strategy of Jason Moss after they register 8 points in their second straight touchdown-free game against the Winnipeg Blue Bombers? And there's a lot there to pick apart. And yeah, their personnel is deficient, but remember when Matt Dominguez got injured in 2007, they're without their best receiver, as were the Rough Riders on Sunday, as they've been lately with Shaq Evans gone. Well, the Riders won a Grey Cup in 2007 without Matt Dominguez, who at the time he was hurt was leading the league in receiving yards. And they worked around it. They won a Grey Cup, even though their starting receiving core in the Grey Cup included Michael Palmer and Corey Grant and Yo Murphy, right? They had Flick Fantuz and hope that Kerry Joseph can run the football. So they made the most of the situation without their best receiver. Are the Rough Riders able to do that now under Jason Moss?
It's very pedestrian, isn't it? I think isn't that a great word to describe that whole thing, from Cody Fajardo's performance right down to the receivers to the running game. It was just not very exciting and not very productive, which is still funny. And it's kind of like they're leading at the first half, 8-7. You kind of things. And then Cody had mentioned that too, and we talked about he was hoping that things would pop. Something would go right for them.
Right?
Yeah. So I'm not know why why that kept happening, but it doesn't happen. But the second half, and especially the third quarter, the Bombers just took over that game. Sorry, something off my computer screen. Sorry about that.
You're breaking up on me a bit. Our podcast is now resembling the Rough Rider offense. Sputter.
It is kind of weird that is. Sorry about that, folks. We'll get back on track here. But the good thing is it a good thing we get the Banjo Bowl next week? They get to play the same team again. Can that be a good thing? Can that be a bad thing to play the Blue Bombers, or the Blue Bombers come out and do the exact same thing to them and be satisfied with a low-scoring win, or do they think the Blue Bombers try to throw tricks at them, Rob?
Well, I would rather this than flip the schedule. Suppose the Rough Riders' next game is against Toronto, and then they play Winnipeg. So okay, you get manhandled by Winnipeg in your own park, and then you beat Toronto. Well, okay, that's nice, right? But if you can immediately redeem yourselves in Winnipeg, this game's forgotten and it's neutralized, and you're back in first place again. So or at least tied for it. So that's the good part. The scary part is if you lose that game even by a point, you can pretty much forget first place because you don't play that team again, and your schedule is so road heavy down the stretch. So if they want to finish first, they pretty much got to win this game. And but you've certainly got an opportunity for redemption. It really is a tall order. That the Banjo Bowl has not been kind to them in recent years. And I mean that was a rare low point in the Rough Rider season in 2019 when they went in there for the Banjo Bowl and really didn't do anything. So I'm not sure that there's a huge cause for optimism when we saw what we just saw on Sunday, and you think they're playing that same team and going into that meat grinder once again. That's a tall order, but if you are able to overcome all that, then pretty much everything that we're talking about now is rendered moot.
I only seem to remember bad things happening to the Riders in the Banjo Bowl. I know the Bombers are 9-7 since it got renamed Banjo Bowl, but I just don't have many good memories of going to Winnipeg and watching the Riders play in the Banjo Bowl. Darren Durant getting hurt, blowouts, tight losses and stuff. But it's also going to be interesting. It's their first road trip of this season. And I know that may not have stuff, but it's the first road trip of the season under COVID. And, there's a lot of protocols involved in that and a lot of flying that they're doing. They're not going to have a walkthrough in Winnipeg to get used to it. They're going to do all their walkthrough here and then fly to Winnipeg. A little jump, which may not sound like a big deal, but some of these guys haven't been to IG Field before, so they have no idea what it's like. They don't know what the stadium is conformed like and where they got to go. So it's going to be an adjustment. So going on the road this year is more than just going on the road. I think it's going on the road with COVID, with protocols, with everything that's going along. It's the changes. So I think being on the road is going to be more playing and well on the road is going to be more of a challenge. And it normally is for any football team. So the Riders, and then they go on the road with that performance, and they have to put it behind them. And I know they have. By the time they practice, it's forgotten. The 24-hour rule is in effect, and you just move on to the next game. But
Yeah, but that's
boy,
just cliches. That's just cliches. That's football speak. That's not probably doesn't represent the reality of the situation. If you don't think what Winnipeg just did to you, then you're probably not approaching the game correctly, because that's got to burn at you.
Yeah.
If you win the game, it's wise to kind of forget it because you get complacent. But if you lose a game like that, I'm not sure the 24-hour rule is a good idea. Make it the 98-hour rule or the 112-hour rule or whatever the math, 122-hour rule. That should spur you on. Don't wash it away. Use it to make yourself better. And they've got to be so much better. And yeah, going on the road's an inconvenience. Well, how much did that hurt the Bombers? Given all the COVID considerations, they came in here and.
But it's still a consideration, though, Rob. I think I think we can not overlook it.
No, but it didn't hurt the Bombers, so it shouldn't hurt the Rough Riders.
Right? Well, it hurts every team that wins on the road. Like look at Edmonton; they went on the road.
Yeah.
I guess that's my theory doesn't hold a lot of water, but Edmonton played pretty well on the road too, so maybe they can do it. But it's still going to be a bit of an adjustment. It's just so weird. In the middle of September, the first road game. I don't know. We talked about Labor Day coming up after just 3 games, but the middle of September, usually they've had 2 or 3 road games by now.
4,
just seems
5,
like 5 or 6. Yeah. Just seems crazy. Like I think Craig's going to have to do, and the coaches are really going to have to do some incredible coaching down the stretch here, and especially, as you said, if they lose this Banjo Bowl, I don't think first place is in their grasp either. I think it's just about we know it's a 14-game season, but my brain keeps thinking 18 games.
Yeah, you just run out of time really quickly.
Yeah,
and that's a tall order. And then you've got all those road games down the stretch. You got 2 short weeks back to back, which isn't necessarily beneficial. The schedule gets a lot goofier down the stretch. They've come out of it okay. We got to remember we're talking about a 3-1 football team.
Yeah.
And so that's a pretty commendable performance. I mean, 2007, I referenced that earlier. They were 2-2 after 4 games. They're 3-1 this year. So all is not lost. So, but they have to. The urgency is heightened when you look at the shortened season.
And that's it. I think we're overlooking the fact that they came through 4 games, 3-1. And I know Willie Jefferson says they haven't really played anybody. They haven't played any teams that as good as Winnipeg, and that's true. But they still won 3 or 4 home games to start off the season. That's important. They could have lost the season by struggling at home early, but they're given credit for playing 3 good games at home, decent games, and good in front of good crowds. So yeah, maybe they did what they had to do at home almost. But
you look at the 2 games. Let's look at the 2 games the Riders sold out. In the second half of the 2 games they sold out, they scored 2 points combined over those 2 games.
Wow.
So it just occurred to me. That's real. I'm going to make a note of that for observations. I'm really glad we have this podcast so I can come up with this pointless observation. Curious for a second while I type that into my observations list.
That's crazy, Rob. That's a crazy stat, And and I think they play Toronto. They play Toronto after the Bombers. And other than looking pretty good in those baby blue uniforms, those uniforms, the Argos didn't look all that great yesterday. So we'll see what happens with them.
But I think it's you're playing teams that aren't as good as the Bombers, but that's probably going to be the case for the remainder of the season after they play the Bombers on Saturday. But the Riders have to be very cognizant of the fact that they've got some personnel issues right now on offense. And are those resolvable until Shaq Evans comes back? I watched Jamal Morrow return kicks and I see his elusiveness. Like, why don't you incorporate him into the offensive package a little bit? He looks like he might be able to make some people miss and do some things. And William Powell is still a good back, and we saw that in spurts on Sunday. But I watched Andrew Harris run the ball, and I watch William Powell run the ball. I don't see any comparison between the two of them in terms of power, and in terms of just you have to fear Andrew Harris if you're the Rough Riders defense. I don't think a rival defense has to fear a William Powell running attack. But can Jamal Morrow give you a bit of a different dimension? He looks to me like he can be a playmaker, and there's a real paucity of them on the Rough Riders if you look at it right now.
Who would have thought we'd be talking about the Riders receivers when all the concerns about the offensive line?
Yeah.
they've gone like this way, and there's still some concerns about the offensive line, but we kind of thought the Riders were going to be okay at receivers, and if not great, we thought that was going to be a great offense. And now you're saying that, holy smokes, like there's issues there, and that's all because of the loss of Shaq Evans.
Well,
So
you look at their import receivers, and they have 3 import slots designated, and Braden Lennius, absolutely start him. Mitch Picton, absolutely. And if he doesn't play, Keon Schaefer-Baker looked good. So they've got some options there. I don't mind them starting the 2 Canadians, but if you look at your 3 American receivers, Kyran Moore is legit, but and I think Jordan Williams-Lambert is shown what he can do, but he's shown that as primarily as a slot back. So why is he playing wide out? And why does Ricardo Lewis start unexpectedly, perhaps impulsively, instead of Paul McRoberts? Can you explain that? Can you figure that one out? Because I can't.
I can't. I have no idea. I thought Paul McRoberts was automatic to start in the Labor Day Classic. I didn't think there was any doubt that he was there. And then so there has to be something behind that story, which unfortunately we won't know, because Craig Dickinson is pretty frank and candid in his assessment. Even when you asked him the other game, he didn't have an answer for it. Other than Ricardo Lewis.
The Bombers had an answer for it.
It sure did.
Why? Like, if you're going to just tinker and try and infuse new players into the lineup, you don't do it against the Winnipeg Blue Bombers defense. Yeah. Honestly. So what was it that suddenly resulted in the relegation of Paul McRoberts to the practice roster? It was pretty much left unexplained. The fact that Ricardo Lewis had a better week of practice than Paul McRoberts, that's a pretty unconvincing reason.
Yeah. Maybe there's a sign. McRoberts has started in almost every practice we've seen through training camps and stuff. And what happened in the 1 week between he gets his first start in the Labor Day Classic, I'm not quite sure.
But then if you're going to do that, put him out wide and move Jordan Williams-Lambert back inside.
But where do you get Williams-Lambert on the field? How do you get Williams-Lambert on the field if you don't have him at the wide receiver, though? Because you look at the effectiveness.
You move Ricardo Lewis to wide receiver and put Jordan Williams-Lambert back at slot back. It's pretty easy to do.
How about the effectiveness of Shaq Evans at that spot, though? Is that just because
he's good at it?
Good at it.
He's got the speed to. He can run past people. He's fast. He's good at that position. Jordan Williams-Lambert doesn't have the kind of jets that Shaq Evans does. It's a different. We saw in 2019 when now granted he was playing wide out as opposed to the Shaq Evans wide out position. But how much did Jordan Williams-Lambert produce in 2019 when they moved him out wide? Now he had a decent game on Sunday, but I think they can. And then there are times that they have him playing as an inside receiver. But why are you? Your arsenal is depleted as it is. Why are you tinkering then with what the limited resources that you now have? That really baffles me. I mean, aside from Kyran Moore and Jordan Williams-Lambert, no Rough Rider caught more than 2 of Cody Fajardo's passes.
Yeah, I know.
So they caught, after those 2 receivers, Brandon Alexander caught as many of Cody Fajardo's passes as did anyone else on the Rough Riders.
Mm-hmm.
So they've just got such a limited arsenal. You only have to worry about 2 guys.
Yeah.
And I don't think you have to worry about the running game very much. Like to me, it's more personnel than anything, and you can scheme your way around it. I think the Riders and Jason Moss did a good job at scheming their way around perceived or actual deficiencies on the offensive line with all the quick passes, etc. They were able to get away with that against other teams, but there's only so much you can do against a defense as formidable as Winnipeg's. But now the onus is on Jason Moss to scheme his way around the Winnipeg defense and take what he saw on Sunday, give yourself a virtual week of film study and implementation, and show Winnipeg some looks that they have not seen or those with which they cannot contend. If they can do that, bravo to them. And next week's podcast is an entirely different session.
Yeah, what do we do if they've lost 2 in a row? Eh? That's going to be a whole other debate and discussion. And
now, then the debate becomes: did they get a home playoff game? That's what they're playing for at that point. And due to the composition of the West Division, they're still in reasonable shape there. They've got 3 games against Calgary, and they've yet to play Edmonton, and so and they've already won 1 game against BC. So they're in pretty decent shape for a home playoff game. That's totally within, as far as within their control. But forget first place if they lose this weekend. They could play They could play way better. They could lose by 1 point and play a great game, but the first place is gone if they don't beat Winnipeg, unless something. Now I'm going to throw a qualifier in there. Zach Collaros goes down, the Bomber season's done.
Yeah.
So maybe the fragility of Zach Collaros has to be factored into any presumptions here, but he certainly has not lived up to the glass house label that was attached to him by many pundits, including this one, for several years.
He played tough in that game too. He took a pretty big hit, and then he does those little scrambling moves. And we've touched upon this in the past. He's not the Zach Collaros we saw play with the Rough Riders. There's not even a resemblance.
Who is this guy?
And I keep watching, going.
It's the 2015 Zach Collaros.
Yeah, and I watch him being interviewed, and I watch him talking to people, and he's just a whole different guy. That was the one that we put up with, and I wonder how much he hated it here. And I think
I have a theory on that. Chris Jones partially. You acquire Zach Collaros from the Hamilton Tiger Cats. You then sign him, you sign him to a new deal that pays him lots and lots of money. And then you come into training camp and say there's an open competition for starting quarterback between Brandon Bridge and Zach Collaros. So right now you've poisoned the whole atmosphere. You're paying him all that money. You've made the trade for him, and you don't have enough faith in him to say definitively that he's our starting quarterback. You don't publicly profess to be aligned with him in that fashion, and then you're trying to sell people on the notion that Brandon Bridge is the alternative, and we saw how well that worked in 2018. So you saddle him with that. You saddle him with an offense that's, especially in retrospect, clearly incompatible with what he can do. I might have some more observations here. And then at the start of the season, 2017, they had 3 1,000-yard receivers. Well, suddenly you enter 2018, and very quickly you have one of those guys left because you cut Bakari Grant and you moved Duron Carter, who's the Riders' most outstanding player in 2017, to defense, and then cut him. And the Riders' Duron Carter's first game back after being moved to defense, and Zach Collaros' first game back after missing some time with an injury. They go to Edmonton. He throws a long touchdown pass to Duron Carter. You think maybe the Riders have a deep passing game, and they cut Duron Carter. So to what extent was Zach Collaros totally disarmed by the manner in which the Rough Riders approached the 2018 season, and then the manner in which they executed it? And then you look at those numbers and you think, I don't think it's a Zach Collaros issue in 2018. I think it's scheme, and I think it's from the top down. They just did not give him the opportunity, and they did not give him the endorsement that would allow him to thrive here. And now he has that in Winnipeg, and look what's happening.
Well, I know. I can remember that training.
I'm getting so many ideas out of this.
Yeah, you're very welcome. I remember that training camp, and you kept saying to me, Murray, there's no way Zach Collaros isn't the starting quarterback. But the coach kept saying this just to me. And we said to him, why? Because he likes that competition, that no one should be comfortable in their positions. Well, I think your quarterback needs to be comfortable in his position. And you see what happened with Hamilton when they were doing with Mazzoli and Evans. That they were at the beginning of training camp too. That was a competition too. So I think that's one of those things that Chris made a mistake in that one. And also Zach just wasn't happy here. And I'm going to take hate seems like he just wasn't happy here. And then in 17 and 19, but I mentioned this in 19 he came back with a resolve that things are going to be different. He had a different coach, he had different the same offensive coordinator, but he was going to be different in Saskatchewan, and he only had 3 plays to really show what he could do, and he was done. So maybe that's the way bad luck that sort of stalked him. But I agree with you. If Zach gets hurt, I don't know what the Blue Bombers do for a quarterback.
Yeah, and there's no Zach Collaros to trade for like there was in 2019.
No, and someone brought it up, and how they brought up, everyone said, well, let's trade for quarterback. Let's do all this stuff. Trades are pretty tough to do because I think you still got to go through quarantine right now.
Yeah.
So Matt, if you're making
if there's a quarterback out there, do you think Ottawa's going to want to try and get one?
Yeah, exactly. And even if they get one, Rob, they're going to have to wait at least 2 weeks before they can even use them. And so now look at Ottawa's record and where they are. Is it even to their advantage to trade for a quarterback now? Like maybe get Dom Davis in there and get him set up and do something that's something contribute more than Matt Nichols is right now. Because right now Matt Nichols just doesn't look like a pro quarterback right now. There's something wrong with him.
Yeah, there's nickels and no dimes. The way that passing attack is going. I mean, his arm is shot, and even if it wasn't, what's he got to work with? I mean, we talk about the Rider receiving core. That receiving core would be welcomed in Ottawa right now.
I'm hard pressed to name a wide an Ottawa Red Blacks receiver.
There's what,
Maybe
Daniel
Brad
Peterman.
Sinopoli.
There's R.J. Harris. There's Davis, and
Okay,
there's
you
Tony
can't go.
Gabriel. There's Whit Tucker. There's Jeff
Brad
Avery.
Sinopoli, Brad Sinopoli, Greg Ellingson. It's funny that all the pundits and especially Derek Taylor is always picking the Ottawa is going to be last, the worst team in the league, and looks like Derek Taylor's going to be bang on about them. They're hard to watch.
Well, my predictions are always bad, but in 2019 I picked Ottawa to finish below the Atlantic Schooners in the East Division, and then they won their first two games. I thought, does this make me look foolish? And then they won one of their last 16, and Dominic Davis was their quarterback for most of that season, and he's their answer after he had 5 touchdown passes and 14 interceptions in 2019, and now he's going to fix them. Like,
yeah.
So
maybe the Rider Nation can say things could be a lot worse here. I was kind of wondering, late in the game, we look kind of why they didn't put in Isaac Harker. I know that's Craig's philosophy is you're the quarterback, you play. There's no sort of fooling around to get guys reps, just garbage time. But what does that accomplish, I guess? But
there was no reason to. I mean, the Riders are down by 15 points, but they got down to the 4-yard line and then down to the 13-yard line. And if they score a touchdown there, get the onside kick, and score another touchdown, they win the game. And stranger things have happened in Canadian football. And stranger things have happened on Labor Day. The winner, I think it was in 87. The Bombers came back from such a deficit late in the game and won. And until
did you think they were coming back from that one?
No, but you've got to take that chance with your best guys when you still have that opportunity, when it's still mathematically possible. If let's say the Riders had gotten one more possession after they were unsuccessful down deep in Winnipeg territory, by all means bring in Isaac Harker. But as long as there's that opportunity, you go with Cody Fajardo. That's why you're paying him that money. That's why he's your guy, and it's a disservice to your fans if you take him out when there's still that possibility. 3 or 4 minutes left, you're down by two possessions. Doesn't look good, especially against that defense. But it's not impossible. And so, and especially on Labor Day weekend when anything can happen. So, but my concern, and the other thing is that much has been made. I'm rambling here. Much has been made about should Cody Fajardo be running as much as he is. Well, when you consider if they had a full arsenal, then maybe you could say, just play game manager and distribute the ball and use the weapons around you, etc. But when your arsenal is so depleted, and if you're then being very careful about running with Cody Fajardo, you're taking one of your few weapons out of the offense, and it's one fewer bullet that you have in the chamber. Yeah. And there aren't many bullets in that chamber right now, so it's a pretty small chamber. So I think they've got to use Cody Fajardo in that fashion. Is what else do they have right now? They may prove me wrong on Sunday, but
maybe they will.
But if they do, it's fun next week. But really, I'll be interested to see what adjustments they can make. Sometimes you lose a game, and it can be galvanizing, and it forces you to take a long, hard look at yourself. You self-scout a lot more, and it's tougher to adjust after a win than the loss. And adjustments is certainly warranted here. So, are there some things they can do that they haven't been doing so far? And there's some different looks that they can show Winnipeg, because you just tear it down to the foundation offensively and start building it back up after what happened last week.
Can you imagine saying that a professional quarterback in the CFL would hit 2 uprights against the same team with the same receiver, with the same defensive back, running basically the same pattern at different ends. Same stadium.
Back-to-back games against that team.
Like this, I don't know. I went
same juncture, virtually the same juncture of the game. Within the final, minute and 7. You know what it reminded me of? Remember the Riders? There was a 13th man game in 2019. And then the Riders play Montreal again to open the 2018 season. And what did the Riders get called for? Too many men on the field late in that game. And that was a real parallel to
remember the crowd's reaction to that too? They went, "Oh, it was."
Oh, I know. It's just Cody. He said he had to laugh, and really, you have to at that point. You
can laugh in the regular season. It's not laughing during the one play that almost takes you to to the Grey Cup game. What do you think about the crowd? We're obviously that's the last game before people who aren't fully vaccinated are allowed in the stadium.
Um,
Do you think we saw something? I think it looked pretty full, but it's hard
yeah,
to tell now. It's hard to make that measure because so many people stand out by the Pill Country and they're in the concourses. Like there's lots of empty seats, but that doesn't mean the people aren't in the stadium. They're
yeah,
just sort of doing this. It's a different game watching experience now from when you used to go to the games and sit in the stands, or you sat in your seat and you watched the game.
yeah.
Now
Until
you go to
somebody
the
stood
game.
up in front of me during the play, and
Yeah, but now you go to the games, it's a social thing. It's meeting in Pill Country, it's meeting in the wide concourses, it's talking to people in the first, like, so it's a different style of game and difference going on. So sometimes all those empty seats look empty, but the people are still in the stadium. And I think Labor Day sells out, and I would have to admit, and I have no way to measure this, there didn't seem to be as many Bomber fans as in the past.
no,
And
and there was usually when the Bombers do something, it's kind of audible, and there wasn't.
there wasn't these huge
That's a really good
pockets of
point.
blue. There wasn't the huge pockets of blue that we get. Now, I walked by and I noticed I didn't Wayne's World, which is this right across Kitty Corner from where old Mosaic Stadium used to be just packed with Bomber fans. Like every bus would unload them.
Oh, Wayne
and they'd all
Kuntz's
go,
place.
yes, and they'd all go in there and party. Now I just glanced and I didn't really get a fair assessment, but it didn't look as full as it had in the past. And I wonder if people are the Bomber fans. They have to be fully vaxxed to go to their games, and I think they were uncomfortable coming here to go to this, not knowing if the person beside you is vaccinated or not vaccinated. I think that may have had something to do with, maybe the Bomber fans not traveling as much. Like COVID is still part of our lives, folks.
Well, this is in many ways March of 2020 all over again. You look at these numbers, ooh, and I mean it's terrifying when you look at these numbers, and yet to a degree we're carrying on like it's business as usual. We're carrying on like it's 2019. We're partying like it's 1999, and so there's a global pandemic that's in its fourth wave, and it's not even winter yet, and we have a vaccine that some people, for reasons unbeknownst to me, choose not to take, and the numbers are soaring, and we're just carrying on like, yeah, we're just gonna
There's just a whole
keep
different feeling
forging
to this
ahead.
wave.
I don't.
There's a
And
whole
sorry, go ahead.
there's a whole different feeling to this wave. Like even I'm more comfortable in that. And I know we would talk last Labor Day, there was no game, and we said, yeah, but look at the numbers though. We couldn't have had a game. And now the numbers are just as high. So somehow
It had gone down so much, so appreciably by the end of last summer, and now
yeah,
we're in the 300s and 400s again.
no one
And
seems to be
and
panicking.
everybody's like, no, just business as usual. Everything's fine. We're not gonna have any restrictions. Blah 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 blah. It's I went for a walk around the concourse before the game, which I don't ordinarily do, unless I want to get to walk box, and I love walk box. And a couple of friends of mine were at the game, and I wanted to visit with them. Ashley Robinson, a former colleague of ours at the Leader Post, she's now visiting. She was now living in Winnipeg, and she was in for the game. And Taylor Rattray of CTV Regina, now Taylor Anderson, she just got married, and Taylor and Ashley went to the game together. So I went to say hi to them, and I had to go around to the east side, and it took forever to get there because there's so many bottlenecks. Everywhere there's a beer lineup or a beer token lineup, it just creates an absolute traffic jam. And you've got people trying to squeeze inside you. I think you said maybe 5% of the people are wearing masks. That was my observation as well.
Yeah,
so we're in a
that's high.
pandemic. Numbers are soaring over the weekend, and people are trying to squeeze through holes that some running backs wouldn't be able to get through. And people are coming to a dead stop because of these endless beer lines. And I'm thinking there's a pandemic here. Like, what are the chances that I pass 10, 20, 30 people who have COVID? And I've been double vaxxed, but I'm 57 years old and I have type 2 diabetes. I have an underlying condition, and the vaccines are not infallible. So the whole time as I did that lap of the stadium, first to get to where Taylor and Ashley were sitting, and then to get to the press box, I had to do a full lap. It's just like, did I put my health in danger here? And
you're wearing a mask though.
I was wearing a mask, but that put me in the clear minority.
Yeah, it was.
I mean, it was a clear minority, and I really wondered if that was a very silly thing to do. And I made a point of not telling my wife about it, so I hope she doesn't watch the podcast. By the way, my dog is. Look at my dog. That might
Oh,
actually
that's a
might be
great,
kind of obscene. Sorry.
that's a great shot. One of the things is I'm wondering how many. I'm thinking there's going to be a good contingent of Rider fans heading to the Bombers game because they're fully vaxxed. Because if they
Yeah.
weren't fully vaxxed, I don't think the numbers would be as high. But they're going there, they're comfortable. There's this one woman I know who I don't think she went to the Labor Day game, but she's going to the Banjo Bowl
Yeah.
because they're fully vaxxed.
Isn't that something? That's
Yeah,
really,
and then come September 17th, you've got to be fully vaxxed. And even now we had to wear masks in the press box. And that's the longest I've worn a mask for. I've
yeah.
never been in a position that for my full working day I've had to wear a mask because we all work at home. We all do
Yeah.
things. We're unmasked. But do you ever worn a mask that long before?
Yeah, because I went the WHL bubble or the East
Okay,
Division
sorry.
hub.
Yeah, I didn't
I,
go to
I, I
those.
became an inveterate watcher of those games. So I wore a mask the whole time there. I went to the Pats scrimmage on Monday afternoon, wore a mask, uh, which is probably good because I'm pretty ugly. But
Well, that's
some people suggest that I should just keep wearing a mask even after we've forgotten what COVID is. But yeah, it's not comfortable. I can't imagine wearing one for an entire work shift
like my ears were killing me.
for 3 or 4 hours.
Yeah, like I brought an extra mask with me just because I was a little concerned about the one I brought, that how my ears would feel, and they were sore after. So I even had more. Like, got so much compassion for the healthcare workers. I can only imagine all the stuff they're wearing and
Oh,
how they go through it. And we're sitting there through a 4-hour football game, and then, well, it was more than that because we got to
you write
write.
about sports for a living. They save lives.
Yeah, and but I
You
can
know.
only imagine what it's. So I'm gonna have to, as I vowed leaving the stadium, I'm gonna have to go look around for a more comfortable mask that somehow, because it's obviously we're going to be wearing masks for quite a while again. At
Yeah.
least I am. I'm not
Oh,
planning to ditch my mask for any opportunity. No, just because I know I can't, as I said before the vaccine, I know it won't kill me, but I don't want to get sick either because getting sick doesn't sound like a very fun sickness either.
no, my sister had it. My sister still has limited taste. Um, uh, I don't mean
But
that
you might say that about
in,
Crisula.
ter- in terms of, in terms of taste buds. My
Oh,
sister is still she got the it was late last winter and her entire family got it and she's still dealing with some of the consequences of it. And so yeah, even if it doesn't kill you, it certainly is something to contend with, and it's a general health issue, and we still don't know what the long-term effects of this thing are.
yeah. So
So,
let's not get it.
but in the meantime, I'm not saying shut down sports again. I'd be biting the hand that feeds me. But are we just putting bags over our heads and trying to act like nothing is happening in some cases when look at these numbers? It's terrifying. And I wonder if we're going to reach a point where the numbers, if they keep accelerating, make it imperative to go back to some restrictions that would make mass gatherings inadvisable. We're having mass gatherings and there's 400 cases a day.
Yeah.
Like, are those incompatible? I'm not saying yes. I'm not saying no. I'm just asking the question. And I think it's a fair question to ask considering the climate right now.
Especially we're heading indoors too now. Like at least in
Yeah.
an outdoor stadium, it's it's serious, but it's maybe not as serious. But hockey's starting up, the Pats are
Yeah.
starting, university sports are starting up, high school sports, all indoors. So what's going to happen when we go back indoors again and people aren't wearing their masks because they're double vax? Well, we have to wear masks now. And I maybe give the city of Regina credit for taking those huge steps to say you got to wear a mask. Yes,
Well,
let's just go to.
isn't it nice to see someone in power actually be proactive in this case?
Yeah.
I'm not going to get partisan again. I'm not a partisan person. I voted for pretty much every credible political party that there is provincially and federally. And I make my decisions election to election based upon who I think makes the best case to be elected. So I don't have any political memberships. I don't have any political leanings. But I look at our politicians right now, and are they looking out for our best interests the way they're managing this pandemic? Are they looking beyond the polls? Are they looking beyond the possible electoral consequences and looking out for the general health of the population? And you just wonder if to what extent political considerations can or should be divorced from the equation right now. And
Well,
maybe we elect politicians and pay them well to make hard, tough decisions. And are those decisions being made or are they being offloaded? John F. Kennedy said in 1963, and he'd written a book called Profiles in Courage about politicians who took stands that were not necessarily popular but principled. I'm not sure how many of today's politicians would merit a chapter in Profiles in Courage. And JFK also said once upon a time, we choose to go to the moon not because it is easy, but because it is hard. And there was a willingness to make the hard decisions there. Are we seeing that now? And what if it comes to that? To what extent do hard decisions impact the sporting world? If we got 400 cases a day in September, and then we move the sports indoors, honestly, and our vaccine policies enough to get us through football season? Is if this goes crazy in the fall? This is a tangent I didn't expect to go on, but it's been on my mind since I did that lap of the concourse on Sunday, and it's bugging me.
Yeah.
Is that fair?
Exactly.
Or am I just rambling again? Is my weekly rant?
I think you've got both. You covered all your bases on that one, Rob.
I finally got JFK into a podcast.
Well, also, and maybe I can have a little rant. When we have a federal election in the middle of the pandemic, that it's not going to prove anything and stuff. And I have to admit, because I'm like you, I'm apolitical. I follow it and I vote. I always vote. But I'm looking at this federal election going, why are we having this federal election? What is it going to accomplish other than maybe, and I don't know, I think Justin Trudeau was hoping to get a majority out of this. I think we're still going to come out of this, based on my absolute no knowledge of politics, we're probably going to come out of this with another majority government. I don't know which side.
Minority government.
And it's still minority government.
And then what have we gained? And why are we doing this in the midst of a point? But it's another example of how we just carry on like business as usual in the midst of a pandemic that's escalating. One that we should have by now been able to at least, if not eradicate, at least control. But
remember months ago, Rob, we were so optimistic. Like, we got our second vaccines. Things were looking really good. They were looking good.
Yeah.
It just shows a sign of just what this virus is like. It's just so uncontrollable and so unpredictable that we're still learning what it's like to fight it every day. And till that fight somehow comes to an end, when I don't know how it's going to come to an end. I don't know. I thought we were there after getting our second vaccines, and now we're going to need a booster shot if we want to travel. I talked to a guy at the stadium. He says he's had 3 already now because he wants to travel. I thought, I never even thought of getting the third one.
It's a fight against COVID. It's also a fight among segments of society. There's talk of this rally at the Rider game before the Rider game on September 17th. So, and we've seen what's happened with protesters in front of hospitals and things like that. You hope the scene outside Mosaic Stadium isn't ugly on September 17th because of this protest. And I mean, honestly, just where all this is going, and it's not directly applicable to the realm of sports, but you have to take a broader look at it, because nothing is really can go on independently of factoring COVID into the equation these days. As far as entering the stadium, as far as what might happen outside of the stadium, etc. It hits you everywhere, and I really wonder what this next winter is going to be like. We've been through a partial winter and a full winter with this, and now the numbers are going haywire in the fall. And what is the effect on sports?
Anyway, do you want to move on to sports and wrap her up?
I think we should wrap her up before I have any more speeches to deliver.
Any more majorities? The majority of those agree with you.
I would hope so. I generally worry about people who agree with me, but I hope this common sense prevails. Here's our traditional extra, mandated by Mark Melnichuk, our fine producer.
If you enjoy the podcast, please leave a review and a 5-star rating. It helps us grow the podcast. You can subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, or wherever you get your podcasts.
What is Stitcher?
If you'd like to send us a question,
it's on my car radio for some reason.
postmedia.com, and we'll read it on the air. You can follow me on Twitter at Rob Vanstone or Murray at MurrayLP.
All right, well, thanks.
Podcast, please leave a review and a 5-star rating. It helps us.
For Murray McCormick, I'm Rob Vanstone. We'll talk to you next week. Thanks for your time today. Take care.
You can subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Google